To this webinar brought to you by Customer Success Collective. Our partners today is Matic. Shortly, I'll be passing over to Matt from Matic and also David, Jan from Jan Young CX, and Bob from Bob London Co., who will be speaking on whether quarterly business reviews are an effective way of engaging with customers, or if they're an outdated method. First of all, before we begin, please take a moment and jump into the chat and share where you're joining us from. I'll start. I'm joining you from Derby, England. And also, before we begin with the content, please, I want to remind you that you can join in on our customer success community on Slack. If you haven't already signed up, it's completely free and it is home to a really great community of fellow product pros who exchange ideas and questions to discover insights together. You just need to go to customersuccesscollective.com to find out more and get involved. I'll drop a link to this website in the chat shortly. While you're there, I want to give you even more content. To be sure that you're checking out our Pro Plus memberships. This will give you access to hundreds of hours of on-demand footage, including webinars like this one, as well as our virtual and in-person events. You will find that these are regularly updated with templates, frameworks, and exclusive weekly content. There's lots going on, so please do check it out. As we go through this session today, please put any questions you have in the chat as long as you think of them. We will gather them up and make sure they are answered by our speakers. I would like to introduce today's speaker, Matt, who will be starting off the moderation today. I'll hand it straight over to you and you can introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Sullivan. I'm a senior technical account manager here at Matic for a little over 2 years. I've been in the account management space for about 5 and just really excited to be here today. I believe I will pass it over to David to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, my name is David. I lead up the account management team over at Matic.io. Prior to coming to Matic, I worked in post-sales at a company called SalesLoft. And there I worked really closely with our customers and our senior stakeholders to build out CS playbooks, strategies, and motions that impacted both the commercial space and the enterprise space over at that organization. With that, I'll pass it over to Bob London because he's the next person on my screen.
Hey, Bob London. I have a customer discovery and listening expert. I've done 2,700 B2B discovery calls in my career, and I teach teams how to get customers to open up so that they stay longer and spend more.
Love that. I guess that leaves me.
Oh, hi, Jan. The baton has been passed.
All right. My name's Jan Young, and I'm the founder and chief customer officer of Jan Young CX. I do a few different things. I am building courses around post-sales revenue leadership. I also coach CS leaders to help them step up as business leaders and get a seat at the executive table. And I also do consulting, primarily around go-to-market alignment and helping teams align so that we can all align ultimately with our customers. So I'm excited about this topic, though, so I'm happy to dig in.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for the introductions. Well, let's just kick it off. So first off, so we're talking about QBRs. So what started this shift? What feels like we were all fine with QBRs one day, and then suddenly we're not? Jan, and Jan, could you maybe give a little bit insight on, what kind of started this shift?
I think because the way that we've delivered QBRs has changed over time. I know that when I was an individual contributor and, there was technology back in that day. I just want to confirm, but when I was an individual contributor, we it was before COVID. And we were out at the offices. We would do these annually. They were the events that everyone was trying to cram into the room for. Frankly, we would do dinners and lunches and other meetings around it. We were bringing industry perspectives to the customer, and we were using it as a strategic meeting. It was a time when we were planning out, things for the year and everything. So it was a meeting for executives and everyone to attend. And then I know that later at some point what happened was they changed and became all about the company, and became all about telling the customer, this is what we want you to know about us. And I think when that happened, our customers started to tune out, as rightly they should, because it wasn't an exchange of information anymore. And I know that anytime that I've gone in and done fractional leadership, that's the first thing I've tried to change is, what are we really doing with these meetings? How are we engaging? But it's tough because, companies tend to just say, look at me, let me tell you about me. This is all about me. And it feels like that. It feels like an cost. So I think that's what's changed. If done right, they're actually quite valuable. But if not done right, who cares? So that's my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, piggybacking off of that, I think Bob, when we had a conversation at a recent conference, you said something that really stuck with me when we were talking about QBRs. And one of the things that you mentioned was like, hey, QBRs have turned into this thing where people buy your product or service, and unbeknownst to them, they also get 4 hours that they didn't know they purchased with your team, where you get to talk about yourself. And I thought that was a hilarious way of putting it, but really you put that into perspective. And Jen, I think that really aligns with what you're talking about. It's like, hey, QBRs are supposed to be a value driver and a value add. It's supposed to be a moment in time that we talk about what you're focused on and your business objectives. And what I see sometimes when we work with even customers at Matic and elsewhere, it's like, during the initial handoff process, we talk about your business objectives. We talk about what we're going to do to help you achieve them. We put together a success plan with milestones that are going to help us kind of inch our way closer to those outcomes. And throughout the course of the many months that transpire before a QBR, we never talk about those objectives again. And sometimes even on the QBR itself, we don't even bring them up. And so I think that's what's kind of caused this shift of, do I really want to attend this QBR? And really the hard part is how do we get people now to attend them to showcase the good stuff that we have to say? And I know, Bob, I know that's a big focus for you too, in the stuff that you do, in trying to get people to come to QBRs and the work that you do prior to the QBR to make sure that you have strong attendance on them and engagement on them. So I'm curious to hear what else you have to say.
Well, I was actually going to give the example you gave, which is, imagine.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Yeah.
No. You saved me some time. But I do think, look, put yourself in the shoes of your customers, or be just in anything you've ever bought in your life. If the seller said, oh, and thank you for buying this new BMW, and we've already pre-scheduled 4 meetings with you this year to show you how to use it and make sure you're getting the most value out of it. It's like, well, wait a minute, hold on a minute. It's a car. I'm supposed to know how to use it already. So I think one of the problems just in the software world, and I can say this because I'm not in a software company, I'm a little bit critical. The product is either easy enough that people they know how to use it and get enough value and they don't need the QBR, or it's so difficult to use that the meetings are consumed with the vendor having to explain every little thing for fear that the customer isn't using it per the adoption stats and they're going to leave. So I think we have a problem where customer success is left holding the bag and assuming a lot of customer success folks are here and maybe account management. Why are we losing customers? Well, because the product's too hard to use. And that is not something historically, in my view, that customer success has exercised its seat at the table to push back on. So if you want to go back to the very beginning, I think it starts with that. But I agree. I love what Jan said. I was nodding my head that there's an expression, a movie quote. The quote is, well, that's enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think of me? And that is that's what the meetings have become. But I think that the problem is not. I don't know that it's just fiddling with the controls of the QBR itself. I think it's a bigger issue than that.
But I think you've hit on something, Bob, and I see that over in the chat too, that especially when we were in that period of growth at any cost, when when it was, when money was free and there was, it was made more sense to just throw bodies at it. So
Right.
companies were building MVPs and they were leaving so much customer friction in its wake, and then they would just continue and just keep building the next thing instead of finishing out the build, right? And then they would have CSMs go in as these stop gaps or as gap fillers. And it's like, well, no, you can't run the report yourself, but if you email me, I'll run the report and email it back to you. It's like, well, that makes no sense, right? So then all of a sudden, in order for a customer to use the product, you are having to hold their hand literally because they can't use it without you, right? And so like that, there's that. And then there's also the assumption of what value is the customer getting from your product? Because I have a video product in particular that will send me these sort of quarterly reports and tell me how many hours of meetings I saved because I'm using their video product. I'm like, well, that's not how I'm using the video product at all. So I haven't saved any of those hours, so they're making assumptions instead of asking the customer, which is what I love about, if we're going to do a love fest here, Bob, about what you do with your customers, is because what you're doing is helping them with those discovery questions, right? Because that's the whole point. We've gotten away from those discovery questions. We need to actually ask our customers, what value do you expect to achieve? Are we achieving it? And then digging into that, right? That's what our discussion should be about, and that's what our QBR should be about, is achieving that value, instead of being gap fillers. Let us do our strategic jobs, please.
Sorry, I wanted to shout out Mike Logan. It looks like his name
Yeah.
is. I got rid of all my QBRs last year. Best thing I ever did. So I would love to hear more later about, Mike, how you did that and why was it the best thing you ever did. But for now, thanks. Thank you, Jan. By the way, I'm not sure if everyone's hearing the same background noise I am, but it's a little loud.
Oh, that might be me.
Okay, so the
I can go close the door.
Just to double down on what Jan said, or double click, and that is that if you want to have success, if you want to run QBRs the way you run them, if the agenda doesn't start with what you've confirmed is already most important to them in a previous conversation, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of slides, and they're not going to show up.
For sure. I think 2 points on that as well that both of you are touching on is, when we do business reviews, one of the biggest things that we do that we see a lot of success in is what we call like the pre-business review, or the championship meeting, where before we even go into a room with executives, we're talking with the folks that we've been engaging with quarter over quarter or month over month. And we sit down and talk to them and have a discovery session to make sure, hey, this is what we're thinking about. This is what we're planning to present and talk about. And we get reassurance from them that we're on the money. And it's an opportunity kind of behind closed doors to not only build rapport with your customer, which at this point you already have because they've joined the call with you, but it's an opportunity for them to help you course correct, so that this way, when you do go into that meeting, you are making sure that you're focused on the right thing. Now, the other thing that you guys mentioned, which I think is really critical, is I won't hide from it. I think anybody who looks at my LinkedIn background will see it. I do have a background in sales, and the first thing they teach you in sales is discovery. Right. And so I don't think that, in customer success, discovery ever goes away. In fact, I think it becomes even more critical. And one of the things I'm sure we'll talk about later on in this meeting is, not just regurgitating information, but using the QBR as an opportunity to cultivate conversation. And at Matic, we have one of these slides that we present to our executive teams or the folks on the executive team of our customers, where it's literally just 3 boxes of objectives and milestones. And we carve out an hour to do these business reviews. And that one slide that has the least amount of data on it takes up 15, 20 minutes of the time. And realistically, we get more value out of that 15 minutes with a very basic slide. And there's my thumbs up. I didn't know I had that turned on. But we get more value out of that 15 minutes than we do throughout the rest of our conversations. And so I guess a question for the room and the folks in the chat is, do you guys do the same thing? Are you reliant on data to tell the story and drive the conversation? Or do you ever take a step back and just present like, hey, this is what we've been focused on. Are we right? And then cultivating a conversation from that. How do you guys feel about that? Is that generally something that you see, not see? What are your thoughts on it?
I have a dark history of sales as well, so I think that came natural to me. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know how else to do it, frankly, and so I don't know. We might be preaching to the converted here, but I think that's why, again, back to the love fest for Bob, that's why I love those discovery questions, because and I think that, Bob, even your questions go beyond just discovery questions, right? Like they really help sort of bring people into the conversation in new ways. And because so often you say, oh, how are you today? Oh, I'm fine. Well, actually, no, I have COVID, which is actually true. But so like, you get used to saying, the same thing. Oh, no, it's fine. Oh, no, I don't really want to get into that. But if you find new angles, new ways of getting into those conversations, it can unlock things. And that's ultimately what we need to do. I mean, if we're doing, the high touch motion, which is what QBRs are around, there's a whole other thing, which is what I love Matic for. I really am doing a love fest today, which is where you can, find ways to communicate at scale, right? But even still, you still need to find ways to figure out what is actually important to the customer that they want to hear about. Otherwise, why bother with any of it? It's just wasted motion.
Yeah, so I think all these great points, just really just making sure that the customer wants to come to these QBRs. We're doing things that they want to talk about. That it's more about them, not so much about us selling our product to them or to the customer. Yeah, really great insight from all.
Can I interrupt that for 1 second though?
Yeah.
Because that said, when we would do these meetings, we would have structured a story, and we would know where we wanted to lead the meeting. So it wasn't that we didn't already have strategies in place, understanding where they were. I did a lot of work before these meetings to get insights about what was happening with them, what direction they were going in, those types of things. We would try to incorporate some of those things. We would have some slides. We would have stories. We would have numbers and stories attached to those numbers, leading them through some things, giving them some different options, but always making certain that whether it was door A, B, or C that they wanted to walk through, that they were all, viable for us, right? So we would have a strategic approach to this, and we would have time to dig in and really have those conversations, right? And I think that that's the difference now too, is if you are overwhelmed with customers and you have to do 20 QBRs a week or 5 QBRs a week or whatever it is, and they're all going to be a half hour, and really all you're trying to do is get in that moment where you're going to sell them this website that you can build for them, and that sort of thing. Like it's what is your intention, right? And if you still need to have your strategy as a company, but you also need to have a way of exchanging with them. Does that? Because it's not just about listening. You are a business. You got to live too, but you're trying to find that intersection, right? Where their business and your business help each other, right? Because when they're successful, that makes you successful, right? Sorry. Anyway, I interrupted, but I couldn't help it.
No, it makes total sense. You really you want to make sure you're aligned with them, and I think that's what we've all been kind of getting at, and telling that story to get them to that place of where we can be too agreeable and kind of find that common ground. Our next question here, we've got, we talked about some of the ways that QBRs, we like the ways that QBR are wrong, but what are some of the ways that QBRs go wrong? Bob, I'd love for you to kick it off and talk about some of your insight on ways you think QBRs go wrong today.
I'll give you, I guess I have a couple things, stories, recommendations. So, to me, and again, I'm so empathetic with the customer's point of view in all this because I've done so many discovery conversations, which are really just open-ended. It's not even discovery, as Jan said, it's just open-ended conversation with a B2B user, decision maker. So, you get to hear a lot. You get to hear a lot more than a normal vendor would hear, I would say. And one of the things that's hilarious to me is, again, like the example that was given before about, hey, if you buy our software, we're going to throw in 4 hourly meetings or quarterly meetings. That's not a customer-driven request. But the other one is that the last slide in the presentation, and I have a big issue with a lot of PowerPoint slides too, is the last slide is questions, discussion. It's a joke. I mean, it's really a joke that we are squeezing out the life and the humanity and the dialogue out of the meeting. So when it goes wrong is when you wait till the end, and then their questions will reveal what's most important to them. And if you didn't address them along the way. So the simple trick is move that slide to the beginning. I know we're all, I guess, even from the chat here and just from talking to so many teams, I know that we're locked into certain motions. And I think we have to really step back from this and see it from the customer's point of view. Like, one way to do a PowerPoint presentation that does work better, or slides, Google Slides, is, hey, if I only had 5 minutes with this customer, what's the first and only thing I would present to them? And that becomes slide 1. Next question, if I had 10 minutes, what's the second thing I would want to talk about with this customer? Boom, that's your second slide. And don't keep adding slides after that. Start with 0, start with a clean sheet. And I'll end briefly with this story that one of the folks that I on a team that I coached and taught said that she had she loved the questions that I taught them and the listening techniques. And then she showed up on the site with the customer at the customer's building. And she also had slides because it was going to be a QBR as well as kind of an open conversation. Fire alarm, evacuation. She found herself in a restaurant with this, her customer who was a VP. And she said afterwards, I just didn't feel right about opening my laptop in this restaurant and going through all these slides. It just seemed so out of context. So she said, the craziest thing happened. We just had a human conversation. And she said she learned she learned so much more about the customer's purpose and intention and outcomes than she had ever learned before. But that's not even the best part, is that at the end, the customer said, this was great. We should do this again. And she said, oh, I'm glad. Why did you say that? And the customer said, because I've never felt like with any vendor that we've ever had a chance to share what's most important to us. And I'd like to bring our CEO to the next meeting. It's like, whoa, big accidental win, big accidental trifecta here. So I think it's when it goes wrong, just back to your question, it's because it's too one way, too reliant on slides as a crutch. Goes back to what we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that ties back to what David said earlier about, that one slide that we have in our deck. It really is just like it's an open-ended conversation that we just want to have with them, where they just, say their thoughts, and then, just like you said, have that kind of human interaction.
Well, I just want to give a shout out to Matic, because I'm saving this for later, but I have an anecdote that I experienced first person, which explains why Matic is so customer focused. And let's just say, I'll tease you by saying it comes from the top. So I'll tell that story in a little while, just to keep people hanging on here.
I love it. Keep the love fest going. So one of the challenges.
I want to give sort of a counter to that, though, because part of what we absolutely need to engage and listen and really connect with the customers. And I think that we've definitely gotten too far away from that. But I also just want to put back in the idea of also having the strategy of what you're doing with the customer, right? Because part of our job too, our role is to persuade, right? And there's usually some direction that we need to go with them. So whether it's during a conversation, which we do need to be listening, but we need to listen and understand them, but to what end, right? It's not just to talk about their weekend, right? It's specifically about how they're doing with the product, what their goals are, but then we still need to get back to that intersection, right? And so I do think that whether we do it through slides or whether we have a sense of what our direction is, like there needs to be some sort of story and strategy and understanding of the facts, of the numbers and things like that, so that you can help and guide them through. I know that that's just a little bit off from what you're saying, Bob, because I know that there's real value when you connect with them.
It's not off. I think that the whole point is to have that conversation that you just talked about you have to have taken a step back in a prior interaction with them. I'm not interested in what they had for lunch either. I'm interested in what's the top priority that their board would be discussing. If I could sneak into a board meeting, how would you react if our competitor called you tomorrow? You know, would you ignore or would you react? So I think we're in total alignment, Jan.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Sorry.
thank you for that. No, you're good, Jen. That's what it's for. It's for the conversation. So one of the challenges of QBRs is getting customers to actually come to them, or they show up and they don't engage. What are the strategies for fixing that? David, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You're muted, David.
Oh. There.
Maybe you muted on the headset. Do the flip up, flip down. You got to flip up, flip down. No, still can't hear you.
All right,
okay, we'll move on. We'll move on while David troubleshoots for a second. Jan, how about you lead us off here for the question?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question now?
Of course. So no, totally. I think we all did. One of the challenges of QBRs is getting customers to actually come to them, or they show up and they don't engage. So what are your strategies for fixing that and getting them to show up and engage?
Yeah, it's all in the pre-work, right? It's all in, and some of this too is I can hear him now. But some of this too is if you aren't multi-threaded, right? Then if you're only engaging with one primary person and you're trying to then create an executive meeting, right? If your product warrants it, let's just step back a second. I'm not going to have a QBR about my Gmail. And that isn't to say that it isn't important or that I don't use it every day. But there are some things that you're not going to have a QBR over. You're not going to get the executives in on, and that you should find a way to meet your needs, and meet their needs, right? Meet their business goals regardless. But if your product is important to their business goals, then you should be able to set up the relationship so that you are multi-threaded, so that you're doing that pre-work, that you understand what is happening, what has changed in the company, and what's of concern to the various personas that you're getting involved in the meeting, and you need to do that pre-work. If you have done that pre-work, then you're putting together an agenda that they care about. When they see that agenda, then they say, okay, I'll make time in my schedule for that meeting, right? But if you haven't done that pre-work, it's not a surprise that you wouldn't, get folks there. Does that make sense?
Yes. By the way, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I don't know what happened there, but I mean, what I was adding to everything that you just said, I think like what I'm seeing in the chat, especially it was coming in earlier, it's like, hey, we got rid of our QBRs. Oh, we changed our QBRs to biannual. Oh, we changed it to just annual, which is all great. But I think like the biggest thing that I'm learning here is like, if your QBR is the primary touch point that you have with a customer, that's quarterly. That's 4 times a year. So if you're only delivering value 4 times a year, you're doing something wrong. And so the way you get people to the QBR or an annual review, even if you're going to do it annually, is doing what you just described, Jan. It's working and partnering with your customer to achieve milestones together, and then taking stock of the work that both of you have done, so that this way they have skin in the game. It's like, hey, I want to go to the QBR right now, not because of what vendor has to say. I want to go to the QBR because I want to show my boss all the work that I did. I want to show my boss the success that we've had, right? And so like we've worked with technology partners where it's like the technology was so beneficial to that person's role or job that they actually saw growth in their professional careers because they had such a huge impact by partnering with the vendor to not only achieve business milestones, but also professional milestones on their own right. And so if you can cultivate that partnership with them and do that over the course of each week or month, leading up to a quarterly business review, then you'll be able to get more people to the call. But if you're just relying on a touch point once per quarter or biannually, I think you're missing the mark. You're missing the whole point.
Yeah.
I have a thought on this question as well. And I think Jan, we talked about it. Jan brought it up in our prep meeting for this. And I think she touched on it earlier about the original intent of these customer meetings is that, and I'll give everyone a question, one of the questions that I teach, these kind of I call them disruptive or truth-seeking questions. I alluded to it before. If you got a call from our competitor tomorrow or an email, how would you react on a scale of 1 to 5? A 1 is you'd probably ignore, delete. A 5 is you'd pretty quickly get back to them. So you ask that question. It takes a little bit of guts. Customers love the question because they get competitor calls all the time and they immediately answer. They say, let's say they say 5. And I always say, well, what is there something that a competitor, why'd you say 5? You'd get back to them. And the number one answer, hundreds and hundreds of times, is, you know what, Bob, I never know when I'm going to learn something new that's going to help me do my job better. I'm a one customer using this one product in this one use case. I'm craving context. I want to know what else is going on with other companies using, or other vendors using this type of approach. And I'm flying blind. I only have, if someone came to me, if the CFO came and said, how do you know there's not a cheaper way to do this? I'd have no idea. So 5 doesn't mean they're going to talk to a competitor because they intend to leave or there's a problem. I think that's a knee jerk that we tend to feel too often. It's like, uh-oh, there's craving context. And to Jan's point in the prep session, this goes back to the great book, The Challenger Sale, is bring them an insight about their industry or their business that's going to help them that they didn't already know. That's what brings people, insights bring people to the table, not more stats about how much they're using the product.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's how we always did our executive meetings that we did annually before, and otherwise we had other types of activities throughout the year that we did that built up to that, right? And it was because we could bring them sort of that insider view because we were working across the industry.
Exactly.
We gave them that they couldn't get otherwise, because even when you're reading an article in some sort of trade magazine or something, it's not the same. It's not, what you get publicly isn't the same as what you can get when you're having those conversations behind the doors. And, that's what we were able to bring to them. So that's why it was standing room only at those meetings.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to look at HubSpot. Why did they invest so much in what amounts to a blog about helping their customers do their job better and prospective customers? Why did they buy a media company for that purpose? It's about giving people insights to do their job better, and it reflects well on the brand, either HubSpot or many other companies that do this well. Matic, I think, is one of them. That they will start to trust you because you're bringing them stuff they can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, for sure. I think a big takeaway here, though, that I think is often easy to say and hard to do without data and information, is having a point of view. In order to be a successful, or in order to follow the principles of the Challenger Sale, you need to possess a point of view and a perspective on how your customers are going to get better with you. And I know we've been talking a little bit about this, or kind of alluded to it, about QBRs being data dumps or whatever, but I don't think data is all bad, right? Discovery is clearly important, but leading up to the quarterly business review, doing things like monthly health checks. And look, it doesn't have to be about usage. It doesn't have to just explicitly be about platform. It could be about partnership. It could be about the company's performance. But getting insights into those things and delivering it each month with a point of view, I think, is something that is really important in order to have a successful QBR if you're going to do them.
Well, and also, hopefully what you are doing is working towards achieving the business value that they need from your product, right? There's some reason, there's some business need that they purchase this product. What is that? What are they trying to achieve? And are you working with them to be sure that they are achieving it, right? And if you're doing those types of things in between those other calls, and if those meetings, the EBRs, QBRs, if those are really to exchange insights and really dig in and re-engage and rethink what your goals should be, kind of resetting your goals, right? So yes, you can reflect on what you've done, but you should also be reflecting on what's happening, what's changed in the marketplace, and those types of things as well.
For sure.
Great. I'd love to piggyback off of David's comment about the data dumps. I think like we've talked about it a little bit, but I'd like to, get a little bit more thought about, sometimes these QBRs feel like they're just data dumps, and what are ways that we can do to make sure that the QBRs aren't just data readouts?
Yeah, and just on that, Carolyn's also asking, like, is there a best practice on an actual agenda or content? I think that kind of aligns with how to avoid it being a data dump. I don't know if I was supposed to go first. Sorry.
No, you can't. No, go right ahead, Jen. There's no. This is kind of an open one. Go right ahead. And I do agree. I think that the agenda very much aligns with how we make sure we're not doing these data dumps. So totally agree.
Well, and so I guess what I would answer that is to ensure that you are working with the customer to build that agenda, right? So are there certain things that you want to be sure that you're sharing with the customer? Are there certain updates, whether it's roadmap at some point, although sometimes a roadmap meeting is separate really than what I don't know. It can vary. Roadmap is usually a more involved thing and that sort of thing. So I'd like to usually do those separate from when you're really exchanging what's happening in the marketplace and that sort of thing. Sometimes you can combine it. But that can sometimes be too much about me. So I think ultimately what you want to do though is dig in, understand what they need from the agenda, what talk about what things you were thinking about bringing to the agenda, make certain that that's mutually agreed upon, right? So you set that agenda ahead of time. You also work through who needs to be there for that discussion. There are times when you're going to bring executives from your company, and there's other times when you don't necessarily need to bring the whole brigade, right? And so trying to find that happy balance as well. It also depends upon who that customer is, right? If they are, 25% of your business, you're going to bring the whole brigade. If they're 5% of your business,
does it have to be a military? Does it have to be a military analogy, really? Like, are we really?
I couldn't think of a name of like how you crowdsource it.
No, I think you're right. It is a brigade. Firefighter.
Right, but I think too, so thinking, and I always think of these meetings as sort of stories, right? What are you doing at these different stages of the meeting, and how are you bringing them along, and what points are you going to be digging into things, and where are you going to end up? You ultimately want to be a happy family, sort of planning, your next year together by the end of this, conversation, or the next quarter, or whatever it is, right? So, how are you going to get there? So there still needs to be sort of that strategic guidance in mind, and making certain that you're not going to deliver the bad news just right up front. You might want to have a few pleasantries first, go into the bad news, then you have some good news, some things like that generally as well. But benchmarks, sure, benchmarks can work, but I think ultimately you want to make certain that it's mutually agreed upon.
Sure, don't go at this alone. That's definitely the key takeaway. I think in regards to the data dump question, obviously at Matic, we get that question a lot, and that's how we advise our customers. But this isn't about Matic. This is just about best practices. One of the biggest learnings that I had when I started going into partnership reviews and business reviews in my last role was really understanding the differences between data and insights. I think that we don't talk about that distinction enough. And I could see Amanda talking about benchmarks as an example. Exactly, right? It's like, data is a recorded set of information that happened over time. Insights is the story that explains what those interactions or events were. And so it's like, I think that a lot of the times when we go into these meetings, we want to be quote unquote data driven. So we just throw stuff on a slide and hope that it lands and sticks. But I think what we're really looking for and what people are dying to see is what you guys have been describing as context, and what I'm calling insights, right? So how do I compare? Benchmarks is a great way of doing that. And I think that's like the biggest thing that I think is going to be the most powerful part of a QBR. But again, I sound like a broken record here. Don't guess what kind of insights your customers want to see. that is a recipe for disaster. If you're in that point in time,
look, I think too much of what teams are, I'm going to use the word forced, and I'm going to come back to it. The way they're forced to do QBRs goes back to the beginning of this conversation. It's so one way that we assume that customers want to hear more about our product and that more about how they can use it, et cetera, et cetera. And that model is just completely broken. And when I say force, I know, because I've asked this before. I was going to do a poll, but I didn't want to screw with the platform. How many people, and you can just say yes or no in the chat if you want. How many are measured on completed QBRs? Because the risk there is that we are incenting and forcing a behavior. John says yes, yes. Oh my gosh, I'm sad. The risk.
They're measured on QBRs.
Companies are forcing a behavior that is not valuable to customers. And I would say this, it might be a little bold. Yeah, QBR completion. If you are incented or motivated or, measured on completed QBRs, I would invite your chief revenue officer or your chief customer officer or your CEO to a QBR so they can see firsthand what it's like to try and drag something out of a customer. I would invite them to see it firsthand. And afterwards, I would politely say, with all due respect, I don't think we should be measured on this, what you just sat through. And I think it will really help.
Well, and the other thing too is when you think about what I've seen especially when I've been a fractional leader, but otherwise sometimes when I've coached and things, is they'll put together a template. Companies will put together a template,
right.
and it's like a cookie cutter thing, right? And it's like, this is where you update, their quarterly numbers here. This is where you do this. This is where you do that, and everybody's going to get the same thing. And that's where then it definitely isn't mutual, because the company has just decided the template for what everyone is going to hear, even if it doesn't apply, as if that's what pertains to each customer, right? And I think that's where it goes off track, because it becomes something that you could do as a recording. And frankly, maybe you should just make that a recording. If somebody wants to watch it, they can, right? Because that's not a meaningful exchange, which is really what those executive business reviews were originally intended to be. That's why they had that title. It was an executive business review. You would review things together. And I do think that data is key in that. I mean, when I would talk about telling stories, we always did it through the numbers, right? We would show, tell the story of, this is what these numbers, this is what your competitors are doing, and they're getting these results. You fit in here. We literally, I when I've had to go and do job interviews and show, how, they'd have me do show an EBR that you did before. Like that was exactly the type of EBRs that I would show that we'd done. I also hate that people do EBRs as an interview process, but don't get me started. I think. But also I mean, I think the idea of trying to ask our CSMs to do meaningful engagement with customers, that's where that measurement of QBR comes in. But I think we're just off track with what we've done with those meetings. I think that's where the challenge is.
I think I totally hear everything you guys are saying, and whether or not we should be measuring a KPI or doing spiffs against QBRs completed is definitely controversial enough for debate. But I think there is, something to be said about QBRs in general, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at the end as to whether or not QBR should be done. But in regards to templates, at least what we see with our customers is first and foremost clarifying what the purpose of a template is supposed to be and how it helps, right? So I think we can agree that some customers need a QBR, if nothing else, just to level set on maybe some friction that occurred previously prior to the QBR being held. And the QBR is an opportunity for us to have a core conversation with our customer and have real truths. And where the template comes into play, I think, is mainly for enablement purposes, right? Like you want your newest CSM to be as sharp as your most tenured CSM when they go into a presentation with an executive on the other side. And templates can help with that. Likewise, I think that with certain templates, they can and should be modified and personalized for the recipient, right? But I think like saying no to templates, in my opinion, as like a broad brushstroke, I think it's a little bit dangerous, because I think what you're going to end up seeing in the long term, if you don't have some sort of template or guardrails, is you're going to have 1,000,001 flavors of what a QBR looks like, and you're never going to know which ones are actually working versus which ones are not. And so when I was hearing you talk, like, I see your perspective on having something too rigid, but I think that if you scrap it all together and you just give people the autonomy to go put stuff on a slide and hope that it sticks, you're going to see the pendulum swing in an entirely different direction. And I think what templates allow us to do is to create some level of center of gravity and allow people to think strategically and add things to the slide to make it their own without deviating too far from best practice.
Well, okay, so then what are you trying to do in that meeting, I guess? You know, and I mean, I understand the idea of a template, but if you're just slotting things in, is that ever going to be truly meaningful to the customer? Are you really going to have the exchange that you need? Like, why are you, you know, like, I mean, because we didn't have a template. We did, you know, structure each meeting for that customer, and that's how we got real engagement in standing room only. And we didn't have to ask the executives to come. I mean, you know, you asked them, but I mean, like, you weren't begging them to come, is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's the difference now. And this is then when you're talking about, you know, we would do these trips where we would, you know, have meetings with all of our key clients and this sort of thing, right? It was also when people were in offices, but you know, details like that, none of us are today, right? But I mean, and I think so. There's still going to be updates to that, and I get what you're saying, to have some sort of guardrails. But I just think it just gets too close to just being like, slot that in. I've got to do, you know, 5 a day, 5 a week, 20 a week. You know, I've definitely come in and had to re-engineer teams where they were literally just going from 1/2 hour QBR to the next, and they were not having meaningful exchanges. And they were also given a quota to sell things, and those sales weren't going through because they weren't really based upon what the customers needed. You know, they actually had a very high churn rate too. You know what I mean? Like, I think those things are all connected when you're not paying attention and listening to the customer.
I want to jump in with my favorite topic, which is the customer's perspective on this, at least from my perspective. And that is, so Forrester research has a stat from a few years ago, 88% of executives would rather have a conversation than sit through a presentation with a vendor or internally. And I think what that speaks to is people don't want to feel like the flow of information is to them is being controlled, so that they'll just show up and they have to sit through whatever the vendor decided was important. What I'm hearing, just to bridge the gap maybe, is templates, agendas, slides in the wrong hands, without the ability for a human being on the vendor side to say, you know, let's just think about this meeting from the standpoint of what we've already learned from the customer, you know, and giving the customer some space to breathe and talk and share what's important to them. So you could use, I mean, I don't know how you scale without templates. I don't know how you scale without slides. I hate slides because I found them to be overused as a crutch. But if you want to share data that's not a data dump, just remember, you can't be the only thing you talk about. You have to open the aperture, find out what's going on in their business. And it's not even just discovery, it's just human conversation to understand the why behind what they're asking for, behind the outcome they're asking for. So just try to think of it as, you're not there to control the conversation. Sales is a little different. You are choreographing towards specific outcomes, but this is a little different.
Well, it's over time, but you're still trying to choreograph to some degree.
I know. I didn't mean that literally. I guess what I'm saying is, though, if the product if the product is doing what it's supposed to do, back to my earlier rant, then I just think it wouldn't and shouldn't be this hard to connect the dots to show them that they're getting value. I mean, it's a little bit crazy.
And I get what you're both actually talking about in terms of scaling, right? Because we do need to be able to scale. We do need to have some guardrails. I think that there's just a way of how are you going to ensure that you're having those meaningful conversations, and you're also that it isn't person dependent is how you get, you need to be able to scale, right? It can't just be like, well, if I had an EBR with Jan, it would be great. But if I had an EBR with Jane, then forget it, kind of thing. It needs to be something where there is some consistency across the organization as well.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Because like, I think all too often what we see is like, one person is delivering a type of message in a story using, I'm going to call it a template, even though it might be a bad word, but they're doing it and it's like, it's landing. And then all of a sudden the new CSM comes into the play and all of a sudden that story is radically different and it doesn't resonate. So your customer went from being green to now like yellow and trepidatious about the future. And it's all because the story was told differently because they didn't have the guardrails. And one last point on this last point, which is like my favorite thing to think about is like, when we think of QBRs in my mind, I think we're all talking about it. I'm a very structured person for better or for worse. I view QBRs and templates, if we use them, kind of as like a flow chart of sorts. It's not just slides stacked on top of each other. It's thinking about, okay, where have we gone with the customer and where should we branch off and decide what to show versus not show?
That's exactly what I was referring to. That's a great way to say it. And let's not forget, the reason Matic is, like I was just at Gainsight Pulse with Jan, everyone's talking about Matic. And I think part of the reason is because they're finding a way to help teams scale the way they have meetings and share data. And so it is the essence of in my view, and the reason I feel so connected to Matic's mission is because by saving time on the presentation of the data and the insights in the meeting and how to, you go from formatting bullet points to really just kind of looking at what's been presented to you by the system, is you're freeing up time to be more consultative and more strategic and listening better, which I know I'm biased. That's what I teach, but that's what customers really appreciate is, they want to talk to someone who's a trusted advisor. That's a cliche, but trusted advisors don't bore the crap out of them with slides and data for an entire hour, 4 times a year.
Correct. We appreciate the shout out, Bob. Just so everybody knows, right? Like what we're discussing is something that I mean to my core, irrespective of what we're representing here. So, but I really appreciate that, Bob, and you're 100%
well,
right.
I still have a Matic story to tell that I alluded to in the beginning. So I want to make sure because I know we have 8 minutes left.
Yeah. So yeah, speaking of time, we are going to skip one of our questions and go right to the last one, which is, as David alluded to earlier, to QBR or not to QBR. Really, we've had a lot of great points of why they're valuable and when done in certain ways and things, but I'd love to hear, your guys' final thoughts of like whether QBRs should be happening or shouldn't be.
I'll just jump in and I'll just say, of course, customer meetings should happen. Customer meetings should happen. I think that the outdated kind of bastardized version of QBRs, that, as Jan has rightly pointed out, the history straying away from the origin of adding value to the customer and perspective and getting people to the table, it has to change. It's become something that is a check the box exercise. And I'm going to tell you my story quickly. So the reason I know Matic is because I met their brilliant marketing lead, Bex, and Maddox invited me to participate in what the CEO, Nick, was doing, which was a customer listening tour, meeting with chief customer officer types in cities all around the country and maybe even outside the US, I don't know. And I was fortunate to partner with them in the meeting in Washington, DC, where I'm based. And I have never seen a founder, CEO, be so circumspect about taking notes and listening and not talking about the product once with a room full of people who were probably interested in what that product was. So my point before was this sort of the reason that Matic is figuring it out and getting so much traction is because they take time to step back and understand the customer's perspective before they open their mouth and start pitching and having QBRs. And I think that is the model for the future. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass the baton to whoever else wants to weigh in.
Well, so you didn't go to the Tahiti dinner?
No, I missed that one somehow. I was stuck in downtown Washington.
Yeah, no, I agree. When you do things like listening tours and dinners, which I've also been able to participate in, there is something magical about that. And I think it's nice because you're actually bringing people together, right? And they get to connect with each other. That's also like when you're looking at cabs, like customer advisory boards and the value in meetings like that, right? But getting back to just to QBR, not to QBR, I think let's see, I saw something earlier from I think it was Arbel, who was basically saying it's not that we shouldn't be having these meetings, it's just that we need to go back and reimagine them, because they've drifted into this place of, where we look at our belly button and admire it, and then there happens to be our customer in the room, and that doesn't really work. And let's turn these back into actionable exchanges. Which is why we started doing them in more structured ways in the first place. And I will allow for templates to guide us through that if we need to.
I love that. We swung the ship. And thank you both for the kind words, Bob. That was incredible. And that's exactly what Nick teaches us to do, right? We want to work with partners. It's not really customers, really. We want to make sure that we can actually help the people that trust us. So I'm so glad to hear that.
I just want to say that that's part of it. But by doing this and understanding what the audience wants to talk about and listening, you're going to build a better product that doesn't need so many QBRs. I'm going back to my original point. So there you go.
All good. Well, I guess to answer the question, to wrap up the session, I am still personally in favor of the QBR, and it goes back to the core point that you all have made, which is we still need to talk to our customers, and we shouldn't be irresponsible with our QBRs by making it the end-all be-all of how we speak to our customers. They should just be better, and we should be engaging with our customers more and more and more frequently, because we live in a world where we can. So that's kind of where we land here on the end.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I think we possibly might have time for just one question from the chat before we wrap it up here. Let's see if I can grab a good one. If anyone wanted to post their question again in chat. Oh, here's a good one from Mike. How many of us have to celebrate our customers on social media all the time? Is this necessary?
I'm sorry. That's a great question. It struck.
It is
asking because is he incented to do that also?
I don't know. I guess I haven't thought about doing that. Maybe I'm missing out.
I guess my answer is if it helps, I don't know.
You know what? Actually, what I do like to celebrate customers. What I like to celebrate, though, is what they've achieved and how successful they are, so that others can learn from them. I don't necessarily do it in social media, but I do advocate for doing, where you bring them in and help bring them into webinars and other types of ways in which you're telling the story. So it doesn't look like just a regular, 20-page case study, but actually is in those bite-sized forms, so that people can learn from each other and celebrate each other and see how they're successful using the products in the ways that they're meant to be used. So
absolutely.
And if you're doing that on social media, then that's probably a great way for people to get that bite-sized information.
Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt you, Jan. I just want to make sure that we have
Yeah.
we just want to close out, and
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers today. Bob, Jan, and David, you've been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for everyone for joining. We just really appreciate your time today, and just want to say goodbye and thank you again.
Thanks for hosting. You did a great job. Everyone did a great job.
Yeah, great job, team.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a
Cheers.
good day. Bye.
Bye now.